The deep space watch post floated like a lantern at the edge of a starless gulf, where nothing ever happened and everything important eventually would. Technician Hara had learned the rhythm of quiet, the tick of cooling radiators, the faint hum of long baseline arrays combing dust for whispers. At 02:17 station time, quiet learned a new word: impossible. A single spike rose out of the noise, clean as a bell. Energy density off scale. Patterning, regular, metered, disciplined like a heartbeat that had studied war. Hara called her captain, he called command. Protocols awoke, crisp and confident, the way empires teach themselves to be calm. 12 cruisers ignited blue wakes and pivoted toward the ghost on their scopes. On the far side of that emptiness, another ship watched them come. She was 15 kilometers of plated intention, a cathedral of human industry and memory. On her bridge, Captain Naomi Pierce put 2 fingers on the rail and said the words her crew had rehearsed for months. "We don't arrive to bow. We arrive to belong. Hold your fire, but hold your ground." The watchpost's report rippled through the Galactic Council's systems like a dropped stone across 1,000 calm ponds. The Council prided itself on the geometry of order, forms filed, ambassadors warmed, welcome fleets arrayed in ceremonial arcs. For 10 millennia that geometry had worked. Newcomers arrived timid and grateful, latecomers to a party already humming. The Council brought them language and law. They brought tribute and applause. Captain Jar's Task Force slid into position ahead of the unknown contact, 12 ships abreast, hulls lacquered with the subtle filigree of a power too old to shout. Jar did not doubt his authority. The law was clear. Inspection, registration, then escorted entry, was peace through procedures. He had seen it console frightened species and domesticate arrogant ones. The galaxy was large. The Council's patience was larger. "Range?" he asked. 12 light towers, said his sensor officer. "Energy signature is Captain. The coherence ratios are unnatural. It reads like a power plant married to a philosophy. I don't recognize the design language." "That," Jar said, smoothing a cuff already smooth, "is what inspections are for." Across that narrowing ocean of night, the United Earth ship Yorktown carried its own geometry of order. It was not lacquered. It was not ceremonial. It was stainless steel and radiation black armor, machine corridors labeled in plain English, and a crew who knew the names of their grandparents and the launch mass of every missile rack aboard. Naomi Pierce had walked destroyer decks off series, argued in committee rooms in D.C., and signed a simple oath she'd never broken: defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. "Contacts 12, reported XO Daniel Akoy. They're arraying like they've rehearsed this with smaller fish." "Smaller fish bite," Tactical Chief Rafael Mendoza said, "but they don't surround whales." Naomi nodded. "Comms broadcast our arrival message on a wide matrix. Be first, be clear, be courteous." Communications Officer Lin Tran's voice, translated through Gal Standard, went out like a handshake held level. "We are citizens of Earth and free partner worlds. We seek contact, trade, and the right to sail unhindered. We will not submit to boarding or surrender weapons while under threat. We will answer hostility in proportion and only to stop it." Jar's reply arrived polished as old marble. "Unknown vessel, you are entering Council space. Submit to inspection per statute and prepare to be guided. Failure to comply is a violation of order." Naomi's answer was the American compromise between friendliness and a lock on the door. "Captain Jar, we respect your order, But we did not vote for your statutes. We will not be boarded. We propose mutual observation, safe separation, and a scheduled meeting between recognized authorities. Our laws require that we keep control of this vessel." On Jar's bridge, a murmur. The law was accustomed to yes. The law was not equipped for no that did not tremble. He signaled his ships to widen the arc, polite in posture, constricting in fact. He told himself it was patience. He told himself power made patience moral. On Yorktown, Naomi watched the arc tighten by millimeters per second. The crew did not fidget. They checked seals, safeties, and redundancies until the ship sounded like a church before the service, soft movements, reverent hands. "We're not here to win an argument," Naomi said. "We're here to survive the first 5 minutes if argument fails." Mendoza smiled without showing teeth. "And after the first 5, ma'am?" "Then we teach," Naomi said softly, "not to humiliate, to calibrate. The only thing worse than war is a misunderstanding that thinks it's peace." The bridge lights dimmed 2% as the ship's defensive lattice woke from standby to watchful rest. 127 independent shield segments braided into a sphere with more layers than an onion and fewer excuses than history. In engineering, Chief Ibarra laid a hand on a humming conduit and felt home. Amperage like surf, containment like prayer. Down in Habitat Ring C, a civics teacher from Luna Colony gathered the interns and explained why they were here, to represent a federation that intended to be useful before it tried to be impressive. "Captain," Tran said, "they've repeated the demand. Tone is firmer. They cite dates like sacred texts." "Record this," Naomi replied. She stepped into frame, not in dress whites but in the dark utilities that said work before theater. "Council ships, we aren't your enemy. We also aren't your subject. The frontier isn't a loophole in your law. It's a promise in ours. We're going to hold this line of separation. Do not cross it." Protocol met principle in the dark between stars and, as always, decided to test the other. It began with light. Council cruisers did not fire angrily. They fired the way courthouses open, on time, in order, confident they were the axis of calm around which others must rotate. 12 lances braided space into geometry and struck Yorktown's forward lattice with the authority of 10,000 years. The impact translated to the human ear as a deep, steady thrum, as if a dragon had decided to purr. Shield telemetry climbed, wavered, and settled at 98.4. The sound of the ship did not change. Air kept its civilized temperature. Coffee did not spill. On the main display, the attack drew neat graphs that would later make good training slides. "Report," Naomi said. "Scintillation within expected bands," Mendoza answered. "Thermal bloom absorbed by layer 3, we're green." Jar requested a damage assessment across the link because that was how the script went. Naomi let the silence sit, not to be rude but to refuse the script. American negotiators learn early that the first answer is not always a word. "Second volley charging," XO Akoi said. "They're compensating." "Smart." "Smarter would be not doing this," Naomi replied. "Comms, one last warning. Tactical, set point defense grid to surgical, authorization Pierce 7. Select target, lead cruiser, amidships minimal yield." "Surgical," Mendoza lifted a brow. "They think they are teaching us context. We'll show them scale." Jar watched his board as the human vessel's posture did something he had never seen in a large ship. It didn't brace. It didn't swell power to its heavy mounts. It narrowed like a hand choosing a single thread from a knot. The council's second volley crossed the gap with textbook discipline. It arrived like the future, a little too late. From Yorktown's dorsal spine, a beam no thicker than an argument walked across the dark and asked the lead cruiser a question. The question was not, can you survive? The question was, are you still coherent if I remove everything that makes you a ship and leave you as a lesson? Light touched hull. Hull became memory. The cruiser unraveled into a flower of particles, clean and silent, a firework reserved for auditors. The channel filled with breathing, not words, not orders. Breathing, Jars, his crews, his civilizations, suddenly intimate in a way no council chamber prepares you for. Naomi did not smile. Council formation, she said evenly, this is your demonstration. We will not fire again unless fired upon. Back off 10,000 kilometers and hold. We will answer questions after you stand down your arrays. Mendoza muted his mic and looked at the captain. Ma'am, one shot from a point defense emitter. We just turned their Admiralty curriculum into folklore. We didn't humiliate them, Naomi said. We saved their crews. Pride can heal. Vapor can't. In the wardroom, the interns watched the replay on a public channel because hiding war does not make citizens wise. The civics teacher paused the image at the moment before dissolution. This is why checks and balances aren't toys, she said softly. This is why restraint is a strength, not a leash. On Jar's ships, medics treated no burns. Chaplains spoke anyway. The formation hesitated, peeled away in segments, then as a flock. Jar kept his camera off when he sent the last transmission. Unknown vessel, human vessel, we will report what we saw. Report also what you heard, Naomi said. We said we wanted peace. When the stars were quiet again, engineering vented heat with the decorum of a library turning a page. The crew resumed the small rituals that make big machines gentle. Inventory the fuses, wipe down the grips, recalibrate the gyros, check on the newbies. Naomi stood at the rail and let the thrum of the ship steady the part of her heart that remembered patrolmen on wet city streets and the way authority can curdle if no one asks it why. Captain, Akoy said, joining her, voice low. Command may want a harder line. Maybe, she said. We're still America even when we fly under Earth's flag. We prefer to be the hand you shake, not the fist you fear, but both are attached to the same arm. Where to now? Not toward their capital, Naomi said. Toward the truth. Map their patrol routes. Observe their timing. Let their couriers tell a consistent story. We're not here to conquer. We're here to make room. On a vector that did not threaten anything but assumptions, Yorktown slid deeper into the star field, running lights steady, beacons honest, safeties engaged, history watching. Council Prime's emergency hall glittered with 1,000 kinds of prestige. Crystalline delegates, braided uniforms, waterborne envoys in hovering spheres. Prestige did not help anyone inhale. The replay looped, light, unmaking silence, and every species present saw in the hollow under their ribs the end of certain sentences they loved to say. High Counselor Velen rang the table for order. We must assess, she said, chords resonant, not worship our fears. Admiral Soar, your analysis. Soar's gill-frilled visage remained military, but his eyes were old with a new math. Their emitter coherence exceeds anything in our records. The energy economy is obscene, surgical yield, impossible precision. Our shields would fare no better than Jars. If that was a point defense gun, I am out of nouns. Dr. Hesh, chief technologist, slid models into the air. Ratios, lattices. industrial footprints extrapolated from the ship's waste heat. They are building at a scale that implies redundant shipyards, distributed fabrication, and a grid that treats scarcity as a bug, not a creed. It is undignified. Undignified, asked Counselor Nezat, scales lifting with irritation. You mean inelegant? I mean effective, Hesh said without blinking. I mean they choose mass over minimalism, redundancy over refinement, speed over ceremony. If our doctrine has been to be the gallery that curates civilization, theirs is to be the workshop that fills orders. The chamber muttered. For 10,000 years the council told itself that beauty was the proof of rightness and rightness the proof of rule. Beauty still mattered, proof had shifted. We will send an ambassador, said Velen. We will conduct law. Law to whom? Asked a small voice from a quiet delegation, a species that remembered being boarded gently and taxed perpetually. Law to people who did not sign your law. The question hung like an unfinished bridge. Intelligence reports flowed in, thin but convergent. Human ships seen in 6 sectors, never close enough to spook a trigger, always professional, always recording. They hailed patrols with clear language and clearer lines. They did not ask permission to exist. They did not threaten. They listed coordinates for safe lanes and kept to them with obsessive courtesy. Arrogant, Nezat hissed. Confident, Hesh replied. There's a difference, and we never taught ourselves to tell them apart. Velen authorized a diplomatic overture backed by fleets that were absolutely not called fleets in the press release. The overture was crisp and stern, and self-flattering, in the way declarations get when they forget audience. It demanded recognition of conciliary law within conciliary space, with the grace to permit local customs when they were aesthetically compatible. The reply did not arrive from the ship that had ended the argument in a beam. It arrived from a woman at a lectern in a simple dark suit, the kind worn by people who expect to shake hands more than they expect to be saluted. Good afternoon, she began. I'm Meyer Ortiz, Special Representative of the United Earth and Free Partner Worlds. We appreciate your message. We recognize your history. We don't recognize your jurisdiction. We are prepared to talk about coexistence, corridors, rescue protocols, and trade tomorrow, next week in public. We are not prepared to submit to an authority our citizens never consented to. Consent. The word struck the chamber like a missing instrument returned to an orchestra. The council's founding epics were full of benevolence and necessity. Consent had been assumed, inferred, generalized. It had rarely been asked for by equals. Representative Ortiz, Velen said, you will attend here under our standards for negotiations. Happy to, High Counselor, Ortiz said, under mutually agreed standards, or we can pick a neutral station. Also, your border patrols are overlapping aim points near inhabited moons in Sector Kappa 7. We recommend you adjust. Here are the coordinates. Soar watched his display update in real time with a correction his subordinates had not made. He felt, for the first time in a long career, what it meant to be protected by someone who owed you nothing and wanted nothing from you but your safety in the common space between ships. Is this an ultimatum? Nezat demanded. It's a neighborly warning, Ortiz said. Ultimatums come with countdowns. We don't like countdowns. They force mistakes. The call ended. The chamber resumed the ancient activity of great powers, naming the era that had already begun without their permission. The meeting took place on a station no one claimed but everyone used. The kind of place where freighters leave coffee rings on treaties. Security was visible enough to calm insurance adjusters and invisible enough to flatter diplomats. The council arrived with translators, legalists, and a moral certainty that had never truly been tested. Earth arrived with a lean delegation, a few officers in service blacks, and a public live stream that asked citizens on both sides to watch history be normal. Admiral Elijah Walker represented the fleet. He had the face America gives to burdens: kind lines, sleepless eyes, humor like a folded knife. Velen opened with ceremony. Walker answered with schedule. "We don't do veils well," he said. "Here are our terms." A murmur at the use of the word, he continued before it could turn into theater. "First, recognition. We are independent. Your laws do not bind our citizens. We will respect your corridors and customs where they don't endanger ours. We ask the same. Second, separation. A 5 light-minute buffer around our ships and stations. Cross it uninvited and our captains are authorized to stop you by the least force that works. You saw what least can be. Third, service. If any ship, council, or otherwise broadcasts distress in reach, we respond. We expect the same. If you won't respond, don't block those who will. Fourth, speech. We publish what we do. You can lie about us later if that helps you at home, but we won't be secrets you can mythologize into monsters. Nezat sputtered. "You presume much." Walker nodded. "We presume responsibility. It makes presumption cheaper." Velen's tone held the steady pride of an order that had carried real burdens of its own. "Admiral, you destroyed one of our ships." "We stopped a boarding action with a minimal response tool," Walker said, not moving his voice from the register nurse's use when they tell you a hard fact gently. "We will apologize for the necessity, not the physics. We don't start fights to teach lessons, but we will always end fights to prevent funerals." Hesh leaned in. "How many ships like yours exist?" Walker looked into the camera that wasn't for Hesh. "Enough that this conversation matters, not enough that we can be everywhere, which is why our third term is the point: service." On the public stream, people across both polities watched a rare thing, a doctrine that fit on one page. In shipboard classrooms from Mars to Mississippi Orbital, teachers told students that clarity is a kindness. In council academies, cadets scribbled private notes that sounded suspiciously like admiration. Velen tried another road. "By what authority do you claim the right to chart lanes in space we have administered for ages?" "By the authority of pilots who don't want to die," Walker said. "We fly them, we log them, we publish them. That's the whole trick. It's not sovereignty, it's service." Ortiz slid a packet across the table. It contained nav corrections, collision data, and a schedule for joint rescue drills open to all comers. The paper was heavier than it needed to be, the way paper gets when it hopes to feel like a promise. Nezat's voice sharpened. "And if we refuse these terms, then you will still find our rescue beacons where we laid them," Walker said. "And our ships will still take calls no one else takes, and your citizens will notice who arrives first. Power frightens for a season, help persuades forever." A silence fell with the weight of a hinge. Everyone heard it, the door between ages opening. The old story, rule because you can, met the new story, lead because you show up. Velen's hands, faceted and beautiful, folded. "We will consider." "Please do," Walker said. "We have work either way." He stood, and for one heartbeat 1,000 feeds caught a small human thing. The way his hand lingered on the back of the chair he'd been sitting in, as if it were the rail of a destroyer in heavy seas. The gesture made a better argument than any doctrine. It said we are not magicians, we are stewards. We choose the hard way on purpose. Back aboard Yorktown, Naomi watched the replay and exhaled slowly. Now, she told her crew, we wait like farmers, plant signals, water trust. Harvest time comes when it comes. In a quiet office under Council Prime, a junior analyst drafted a memo her superior would ignore. Subject: public sentiment trending toward service legitimacy in outer systems. Recommendation: adjust doctrine before reality adjusts us. Between the bright and the dark, rescue buoys blinked to life one by one, patient as lighthouses. Somewhere very far away, something vast turned in a construction frame, the kind of hull you only build if you have the money of a continent and the memories of a cemetery. But that was a story for another day. The first real vote was cast in fire. 2 weeks after the station talks, a mining ring in Sector Kappa 7 threw a tantrum no lawyer could calm. A micrometeor cluster walked through a coolant manifold. The manifold kissed a reactor housing, and the whole installation began to hum with the special music of bad math. Positive feedback. The ring's foreman sent a distress hail that cut through a dozen languages to the only grammar that matters. Help, closest by 2 minutes. A council patrol frigate commanded by Captain Jar. He saw the numbers blooming on his board and reached for the script he knew. Stabilize traffic, notify the nearest certified response barge, hold outsiders clear for liability. The certified barge was 31 minutes out. The reactor had 7. On a vector nobody had assigned them, Yorktown bent her course like a sprinter taking the inside lane. Naomi didn't ask permission. She spoke intent. Mining Ring Aurelia, this is UES Yorktown. We have teams, tugs, and a nurse who thinks vacuum is just a rude way to spell outdoors. We're on approach. Jar's warning came fast and formal. Human vessel hold. This is council-administered space. Certified response is inbound. Naomi's answer was a scalpel, not a sledge. We'll be gone before they arrive with your citizens alive, or we'll be here after, writing letters. Silence from Jar for a count of 3. He looked at the projection of a family cluster skating along a corridor where the gravity had gone sulky. He thought of the ship that had turned his cruiser into a parable. He thought of the interns on that ship watching their civics teacher pause a replay. Yorktown, Jar said. You will log every move on an open channel. We will observe and assist. Copy, Naomi replied, already moving. Tactical, strip our outer tugs. Engineering, prep the cold iron injectors. Med, you're in command of the bridge air until further notice. The service doctrine had never sounded more like faith. They came in at a tangent to avoid cooking the ring with their own exhaust. Mag clamped 4 tugs to 4 spokes, and told the ring to breathe shallow while Yorktown forced it to breathe at all. Chief Ibarra's team threaded cold iron, dense, cooled plasma, through patch umbilicals, stealing heat from a reactor that wanted to become a comet. Mendoza deployed spindle drones to cut away 2 tumbling ore barges that threatened to torpedo the whole rescue with Newton's apathy. On a shard of hull that would later be welded into a plaque, Nurse Cavazos cinched a pressure patch with fingers already numb and told a kid a joke about penguins he didn't understand because the punchline required a polar reference, and none of this had poles. Jar's frigate moved like an older brother suddenly impressed with the baby. He ferried evac shuttles in a daisy chain, broadcast Naomi's open-channel checklists across council frequencies, and watched as 3 unaffiliated freighters joined without orders because competence is contagious. At minute 6, the manifold stopped screaming. At minute 7, the reactor's curve flattened and then rolled over like a fever breaking. The ring's foreman cried, which is a very elegant thing to do when you've run out of technical vocabulary. "Council Patrol, you still with us?" Naomi asked, breath steady because she'd kept it steady on purpose the last 3 minutes for the crew. "I am," Jar said. He toggled his camera on. His face looked exactly like a law discovering it prefers mercy to pride. "Thank you. Thank the interns who made our checklists idiot-proof," Naomi said. "We only borrow the glory." Jar relayed the line to his crew. The Galnet did the rest. Clips of the rescue hit public feeds before the ring finished venting steam. The comment overlays came like rain. They answered. They published the plan. They let us watch. Why don't we do it like that? In Council Prime's quiet rooms, a pollster watched dials trend toward a phrase that had been a footnote and now wanted a capital letter: service legitimacy. Not everyone took the hint. In the Committee for Order, Nezet pounded a fist soft enough to be dignified and hard enough to bruise. They violate our border and buy affection with bandages. They lower the price of defiance. Where does this end? "Doctor," Hesh considered a frozen frame of Nurse Cavazos grinning through a cracked visor while she taped a patch with her teeth. "Perhaps it ends," he said, "where most empires end when they last, at usefulness." On Yorktown, the crew put away the heroics the way you hang a coat. They wiped down the grips. They counted their spindle drones. In the med bay, Cavazos warmed her hands around a cup and pretended it was a penguin. Naomi walked the ring of the bridge once and stopped where the stars looked least like opponents. "Ma'am," Mendoza said, voice careful, "we made a friend." "Maybe," Naomi said. "Or maybe we gave someone a story they needed to tell at home. Either way, that's the work." When the certified response barge finally arrived, it found a mining ring that hummed like a tired choir and a logbook that read like a recipe anyone could cook. The barge captain saluted Naomi on an open channel. Naomi saluted back and filed the salute where she filed all the good things. Between "keep doing this" and "do not get proud," the first real vote had been cast. It would not be the last. The second vote wore uniforms. A week after Aurelia, the Committee for Order authorized a clarification patrol in Corridor 8, legalese for blockade with excellent manners. 6 cruisers, 3 frigates, and a legal attaché with a voice like velvet rope moved to halt traffic that had chosen the human-published lanes. The attaché announced in perfect calm that any convoy traveling under unrecognized advisories would be held for inspection and fees. Convoy Hecate 7, 7 haulers, 2 med barges, and a school ship full of apprentices sent a dual hail, one to the committee, one to every beacon with a human code base. Yorktown was 4 minutes out. Arkansas and Okinawa were 10. Rules of engagement, Mendoza asked. Service Doctrine, Section 3, Naomi said. Least force, protect civilians, publish everything. Heavy batteries cold, Akoi confirmed. Point defense surgical, spindles hot, lattice ready. They arrived clean, lights on, broadcasting the corridor regged like a substitute teacher reading the class rules from the top left of the whiteboard. Naomi hailed. Clarification Patrol, this is UES Yorktown. Your formation intersects a humanitarian corridor. You are inside 5 light minutes of protected traffic. Alter course 10,000 kilometers and will coordinate a safe pass. The attaché smiled with the kind of patience people practice in mirrors. Human vessel, you misunderstand. We clarify, you comply. Naomi's answer came without heat. We clarify too, you move or we move you. It would have been easier to scare them. It would have been cleaner to fire a heavy mount across their bows and let kinetic theology do its sermon. It would also have been wrong. Mendoza, Naomi said, thread the lattice. The lattice was ugly engineering dressed in quiet manners, a web of autonomous pods that whispered to a ship's control surfaces with electromagnetic suggestions. It did not explode. It did not pierce. It redirected. 1,000 little hands on 1,000 little levers, turning a charge into a swerve and a volley into a miss. The patrol fired, not because they hated anyone, but because their doctrine told them it would work. The volley walked into the lattice and came out a math lesson about vectors and humility. Yorktown spindles, fast, insect small interceptors, sewed a line between convoy and patrol, chewing guidance fins, licking sensor blisters, leaving scars that would be expensive to buff out and impossible to brag about. Do not target life support, Naomi said into a mic that fed everything. Do not humiliate the crews. Disable weapons, not careers. One cruiser, pride stung harder than its hull, pushed a shot through a gap and clipped Hecate 7's rearmost hauler. The shot took a shallow bite and a deep promise. A med tech named Damaris Coleman, who had stayed at her panel 1 second longer than any doctrine requires, died with her eyes open and her hands still on a patience chart. The lattice did its work. The patrol drifted where it was told. The convoy resumed its original heartbeat. Naomi stood at the rail and let the report of Damaris's death go through her without cracking the place where command keeps the ability to speak. Name her, she said quietly to comms. Lin Tran put Damaris's face on the stream and her favorite recipe in the notes because the dead should never be reduced to numbers or slogans. 1,000 kitchens would make her stew that week. 1,000 crews would murmur a name the committee had never met. Naomi opened a general channel. Clarification Patrol, you were out of bounds. We return your ships with propulsion limited and weapons disarmed. Retrieve them. We will bill you for the spindles. We will not bill you for the lives we didn't take. Convoy Hecate 7, you're clear. We are sorry for your dead. The attaché's face had aged a decade in 20 minutes. This will not stand, he said, the old sentence of an order that cannot imagine gravity. It must, Naomi answered, because it did. Back on Council Prime, Nezet called for reprisals. Velen did not answer immediately. Dr. Hesh requested, grimly, a full readout of the lattice encounter. Admiral Soar read it like a man who has seen a map drawn by someone who loves the road more than the border. In the wardroom, Naomi sat with Damaris's empty cup and told the interns the truth. Restraint isn't cheap, she said. It costs us the chance to be angry. It costs us the satisfaction of decisive damage. It costs us, sometimes, people we love. We pay it because the bill for the other way is worse. They held a 10-minute wake. They read a name into a book. Engineering added a plaque to a spindle rack and tightened a bolt with a little extra care. Yorktown resumed her patrol not 1 watt louder. The second vote had uniforms and a eulogy. When force failed to be glorious, whispers volunteered. The Gray Choir, an office that officially did not exist, moved to make the human beacons look like traps. Drones with Council OEM serials and choir modifications crept toward rescue boys and nudged their firmware just enough to mistime a pulse and mislog a vector. A mistimed pulse in vacuum is a bump in the dark. A mislogged vector is a rumor that eats trust for breakfast. Yorktown didn't catch the first one, the second, the third. She caught the fourth the way musicians hear a wrong note, not with the ear but with the whole body. Beacon Bravo 4's checksum is sulking, Lin Tran said. Either it wants attention, or someone else gave it some. Mendoza's team natted a drone like a child caught with a paintbrush, and the word not half finished over rescue. They followed its handshake through 3 relays and onto a courier with a choir captain who had convinced himself that outcome's excuse means. Naomi did not publish his face. She published the code, the method, and 3 ways to prevent it from ever working again. Then she hailed the courier privately. "You have 6 gray choir operatives aboard," she said. "We have your drone. We have your method. We can break your ship and justify it on a dozen networks. Or you can cut your engines, dump your beacons, and accept a tow to a neutral station where someone with a conscience can interrogate you on a stream watched by 10 million citizens and 3 cats." The choir captain, who had been taught to fear shadows and not the light, cut his engines. Meyer Ortiz met him at the station with a translator and a stack of forms that were not weapons but would act like them with time. The hearing was slow, fair, child-friendly. The choir captain tried to swagger. It sagged. He confessed not to malice but to doctrine. "We can't let them own the lanes," he said. "You own nothing you can't maintain," Ortiz answered. "We maintain, we publish, that's the argument." Hesh watched the stream and sent a private message to Velen. "We cannot win a whisper war against people who prefer to shout the truth. Change the doctrine or drown in our own elegance." The choir changed tactics. They laid a gravity shear around a pilgrimage world in the outer veil. A world that kept no armies, only gardens and a library that smelled like rain. The shear would not rip the planet apart. It would tweak tides until a moon fell wrong and the oceans ate prayers. The choir did not intend genocide. They intended a demonstration with plausible deniability. The universe rarely reads intent as mitigation. By the time Yorktown's astrophysicists solved the math, the window had shrunk to hours. Naomi plotted trajectories and came up short. "We can nudge," Akoi said, "but we can't hold." Ortiz went on a secure line to Admiral Walker. Walker patched through to a yard that still smelled of fresh welds and burned optimism. "Leviathan," he said. The answer came from a woman whose voice carried the weight of a younger ocean. "Leviathan acknowledges. No trumpets, no parade." The dreadnought left her frame with a grace that belied mass beyond good manners. 37 kilometers of consequence moved like a mountain deciding to check on a neighbor. She arrived on the shadow side and lit the world with numbers. Mass projectors kissed the moon's vector with the softness of a parent's hand on a fevered brow. Gravity behaved. Tides agreed to go home. The library kept smelling like rain. Yorktown watched a ship designed to end wars hold a moon instead. Silence fell on the open channels the way it does after a good hymn, full, clean, earned. Naomi hailed Leviathan. "We'll file the rescue report if you're busy," she said. "Please do," said the Leviathan's captain, a woman with the kind of laugh you hear at wakes that turn into reunions. "We prefer other people tell our stories." The choir's trap became the choir's confession. Ortiz did not demand arrests. She demanded audits. Velen ordered them. Nezet resigned the chair of the committee for order to spend more time with philosophy. Soar wrote a memo that would get him in trouble and published it anyway. We can outfight a foe who loves glory. We cannot outlast a neighbor who loves chores. In 1,000 homes, people watched a distant moon stay where it belongs and thought of the shape of power when it is not trying to be poetry. The Whisper War had found its ceiling. It was made of lighthouses. The compact was signed where freighters leave coffee rings. No banners larger than a hull panel. No anthems louder than a docking klaxon. The service compact fit on 2 pages and a handshake, which is how civilization sneaks past cynicism when it means it. Article 1. Recognition. Earth and free partners are independent and will remain so. The Council governs those who consent to be governed. Consent is a verb. Article 2. Separation. 5 light-minute buffers around flagged ships and stations. Violations trigger least force responses with public logs. Boarding requires bilateral warrants and cameras. Article 3. Corridors. Lanes are published, maintained, and open. Anyone may propose corrections. Anyone may inspect code. Beacons preach the same gospel to every ear. Article 4. Rescue. Distress overrides jurisdiction. Responders are immune to interdiction while rendering aid. Reports are public by default and poetic by accident. Article 5. Audit. Whisper offices are now rooms with doors that open outward. If you touch a boy, you bring a checklist and a friend. Velen signed with a pen that had belonged to the counselor who had first negotiated reign rights between 2 worlds that had never learned to share. Ortiz signed with a pen bought at a station kiosk, the kind with glitter in the barrel and a refill you always promise to buy and sometimes actually do. Admiral Walker and Admiral Soar signed as witnesses and looked like men who understood the precise size of their own shadows. Captain Jar stood to speak. He did not mention the cruiser that had become vapor under a beam. He mentioned a ring and a child and a nurse who told a joke about birds that prefer ice. "We learn quickest," he said, "from the people who arrive." Nezet did not attend. Dr. Hesh did, and he smiled like a scientist allowed to love usefulness without apologizing for taste. Yorktown watched from her berth on the long camera no one pretended was decorative. Naomi Pierce declined a front row seat. She walked Habitat Ring C with the interns instead, answering questions about force thresholds and snack bars and why humans put plaques on things. "Because we forget," she said simply, "and we shouldn't." They stopped at the spindle rack. Someone had polished the plaque with Damaris Coleman's name on it. Someone always did. Naomi ran a finger along the edge and felt the burr where the engraving had fought the metal and won. Akoi found her there. "Orders," he said, handing over a tablet with the gentleness people use for bad and good news both. Naomi read. She exhaled. "Instructor," she said, as if the word had shown up late to rehearsal. "Command says we need a school," Akoi replied. "Not for weapons, for checklists." Mendoza sauntered in on the tail of the sentence, grinning like a man who enjoyed being predictable. "About time. I have speeches ready called How Not to Be Impressive." Lin Tran laughed. Chief Ibarra nodded like a cathedral. Naomi looked out at the dock where ships rested like horses that had earned oats. Leviathan hung farther out, patient as a mountain in a clean sky. She had saved a moon and not asked for a medal. That was the point. That would always be the point. Naomi keyed the mic on a local circuit and spoke to the people who would make the compact matter. Pilots, medics, tugs, barge crews. bored students who would one day not be bored when a checklist asked them to hold the world together for 9 minutes. "We didn't win," she said. "We belonged. We didn't conquer corridors, we cleaned them. If you want a banner, grab a mop. If you want a future, answer the hail. We are not the fist of history, we're the handrail." In council homes where suspicion had fermented into pride, a new habit formed. Parents pointed at rescue beacons blinking on their rooftop projectors and told their children a story about neighbors. On Earth and Mars and the free stations, people told the same story and added recipes. The compact did not ban war, it starved it. The galaxy adjusted, not to an empire but to a chore chart written in plain language and enforced by ships that could have been monsters and had chosen to be stewards. Yorktown filed her patrol plan, updated 3 tutorials, and set a course that crossed no borders except the ones in frightened minds. On a day with no trumpets, a boy blinked in the dark and a freighter answered. Somewhere a moon did not fall. Somewhere a law remembered why it was written. Somewhere a captain put 2 fingers on a rail and said the ritual that had become a prayer and then, blessedly, a habit. Hold your fire, but hold your ground.